pages every now and then anyway, so.
Yes, sir. What's up, Kansas City? I'm your host, Glenn Bryan Frizzell. Today we are taping the historic 18th and Vine Jazz District at the Lincoln Building, home of Cascade Media Group. We've had today's special guest on before when he was program officer at LISC. He currently serves as program development and evaluation, can I say coordinator?
Director, yeah.
Director at Full Employment Council. We hope to have a meaningful conversation with him today about economic development and employment in the Kansas City area. Please let's welcome to What's Up Kansas City, Dr. Micah Kubic.
Well, thanks very much for having me today.
We're glad that you could participate. What is your role now with the Full Employment Council?
So at the Full Employment Council, I'm the Director of Planning, Development, and Evaluation. So I help lead the organization's efforts around workforce planning, around putting together special projects, around making sure that we're using evidence-based practices in our work, making sure that the things we're doing are things that really help people gain employment, increase their earnings, increase their income over time, and are really working very well. So I lead all of those under the direction of Clyde McQueen, who's our president and CEO, and I think he's been on the program before as well.
Mr. McQueen is the executive director, and we have had him here. Dr. Kubic, let's take a look at the typical unemployed person, if there is such a thing. According to the latest data, it takes this person 17 weeks or about 4 months to either find a job or stop looking for one. What happens once you're unemployed for more than 1 year? The odds drop to just 9%. CNN Money Report, January 8, 2014. And Bureau of Labor Statistics indicate that the metro area recorded an unemployment rate of 6.9%. That's in Kansas City for the month of February. According to same Bureau of Labor Statistics, the national unemployment rate for African Americans for the same month was 12%. So national rate is 6.9, African Americans is 12.0%. I can remember visiting the FEC myself, having conversation with some of the job seekers there. The majority of the people I talked to were minorities seeking income to support their families. Some of them were college graduates who were comfortable and confident that they could do the job if someone would train them. But here you have job descriptions requiring years of experience that this particular person with a BA or perhaps some master's credits does not have. What do you advise your career counselors to tell someone who has a college degree but does not have the experience that a Kansas City market requires?
Sure. So I think we all have to admit that the employment situation is very difficult right now. And I have to give a little disclaimer here and say, that any opinions expressed are belong to me and me alone, and not to the Full Employment Council, its officers, staff, or board. So this is the gospel according to Micah Kubic.
So please don't get it twisted.
But we have to say that the employment situation is very difficult right now. And that's not the fault of folks who are currently unemployed, right? We've gone through these huge waves of mass layoffs over the last couple of years due to the national economic situation. And folks who currently are seeking jobs have almost nothing at all to do with that, right? So, and although it's difficult for them to transition into employment now, no one, absolutely no one, no employer, nowhere should assume that the reason that a person does not have a job at this point is because they are somehow incapable or not competent. It's because we're going through a really difficult economic time. And lots of folks who are currently unemployed are folks who were gainfully employed for 20 and 30 years before now. So in fact, there was an article in the Kansas City Star, I think last weekend or maybe the weekend before, about folks who are long-term unemployed workers. These are folks who've been employed for more than 27 consecutive weeks. And in large part, these are older people in their 40s and 50s, many of whom were employed almost continuously for 15 and 20 years before that, oftentimes in the same employer. A lot of times they have great skills, great education, but because there's a national economic crisis, they're not able to find employment at this point. And so I think the most important thing for folks to remember is it is the circumstances that we face, not the individuals involved who are the problem per se. And you also made reference to some of the statistics about the gap between black unemployment and white unemployment right now. And I think it's very important for us to say that that is not a new thing. You know, the levels, the numbers are new, are specific to our current situation. But for all of recorded history, for as long as they've been taking statistics, the African American unemployment rate has always been at least twice that of the white unemployment rate, except for about one quarter back in the 1990s when Bill Clinton was president.
That's a fact.
That's a fact. And that's something that we got to do something about, and we shouldn't allow ourselves to believe that it's just because of the current economic situation that that's a problem. Even when this economic situation goes away, that's still going to be a problem, and that's still something that we need to address.
According to Full Employment Council, your website, in-demand career areas are in construction industry, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, and biotechnical services, I guess, Dr. Kubic. What is the FEC doing in high school with high school students to prepare them for the so-called demand career areas?
So we have a very active youth program and have had for many years that works directly with students to help get them academic training, to get them high school diplomas or GEDs, to transition them into post-secondary education, which can include not just a college degree, but also a certificate or some other sort of training relative to those in-demand careers. We work very hard with employers to make sure that students have some place to go after they've gone through the training. Because the worst thing that can happen is for someone to go through all that training, do it successfully, complete, go through it, be there every day, score well, do exactly what they're supposed to do, and then get discouraged because there's no place for them to use those skills that they've just learned. That doesn't help anyone. And so we work very hard at our youth program, which is just across the street as well, near the Black Archives in a facility we call the Cube, which is very nice.
Do you have partnerships with small business in the area, small business owners, small business coalitions?
Oh, absolutely. So we partner very actively with companies and folks who employ people, employers of all size, from very small to very, very large, and all of their trade associations and everyone in between, because the key is to get people into jobs.
I was reading District Chronicles, which is a newspaper published out of the university, and they say during the economic downtime is always a good time to not just seek confidence, but act confidently and perhaps start your own business. If you have an idea or you are a creative type of person, can you help people put 1 + 1 together and come up with that?
So entrepreneurship is always an alternative for folks if they have skills and have something that they really are passionate about, and so absolutely encourage people to do that.
And I know you issued a disclaimer, but can you find anyone who is willing to work a job?
So I think everyone is able to work, and if people are willing to work, then the folks at the FEC will work very hard to make sure that happens.
Thank you for being so eloquent and genuine with that. Dr. Kubic, we know that this week marks the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. Presidents and leaders have met at the Civil Rights Summit at Lyndon B. Johnson's Library in Texas to commemorate the event and talk about forward progress. Yesterday, President Bill Clinton spoke at the event, and civil rights greats like Representative John Lewis and the basketball legend Bill Russell participated in panel discussions. Dr. Kubic, we know that the Civil Rights Act and other like-minded legislation by private business and Congress, I'm going to say officers, that's not right, but Congress officials opened the door for so many in our parents' generation. I've been recently reading a book by Howard University trustee chairman emeritus Frank Savage, who was one of the first successful international investment bankers in the country. Dr. Kubic, he and others were pioneers. They made great strides during this era, but where are the career-minded programs? Where are these acts today? I look around in the community, and this might be personal bias, but I don't see any Martin Luther Kings, no SCLC. One figure, we do have SCLC, but we don't have Martin Luther King, Whitney Young, John Lewis, Malcolm X, Roy Wilkins, Leon Jordan. One iconic figure to speak for the whole post-President Kennedy and Johnson generation about the hopes and the needs. in the African American community. I'm being long-winded here, but our leadership, some would argue, is fragmented at best. How would you assess the leadership in today's Black community, Dr. Kubic? I know that you have a background in which you're a scholar in. Do we need to address the lack of a collective agenda, if there is one, or do we need to rewrite the script to include a more innovative, diverse rainbow nation that Jesse Jackson has spoken about, and include the power of social media that today's young leaders have access to today?
So there's a lot there, right? There's
Yes.
a lot. There's a lot
Yes.
to unpack.
I can break it down for you.
So I think it's certainly true that there's no one single iconic leader the way that there was when, say, Dr. King was active, right? Although there are some folks who've tried to force that off onto Barack Obama, but it's not really a role that he wants. And I'd say in many ways his actions are not ones that suggest that it's a role that he would be comfortable with. But I would also say that even when Dr. King was leading the struggle and was sort of this iconic figure, he was by no means universally applauded, even within the African American community, right? So when he was assassinated, and of course we're marking the commemoration of that last week, there are, a bunch of poll numbers that are floating around, but in April 1968, when he was assassinated, he had unfavorable ratings even within the African American community, right? There were more folks even within the African American community who disapproved of his actions than approved of them. Now, some of that is folks who thought he should have been more radical or more aggressive or adopted more Black Power rhetoric, and it's not. And then there are some folks who thought he was too aggressive and too radical, but we should be mindful of the fact that even though we now think back on him as having this universal support, and having everybody behind him, that was never, ever, ever the case for him. And to try and, I think, hold that standard for someone today would also be unrealistic and probably not going to get us where we want to go. What I would say, though, is that I think that we have turned too much today to looking into the ranks of elected officials to find that one leader. So I think folks still want to have one single leader, but now they're looking at members of Congress. They're looking at members of the city council. They're looking at the president to fill that role. And in general, that's probably not going to happen because just structurally, the role that elected officials have to play in the system and the things that are available to them and the way they can act is different than somebody on the outside like a Dr. King or like a Stokely Carmichael or like even a Whitney Young or Roy Wilkins. The role that they can play is different because they're outside people rather than inside people. And if we want someone to be aggressive and radical and push the envelope and really do the protest thing, then we shouldn't be looking in general to members of Congress or elected officials to do that. That's just not their bag. That's not what they're there for. We need them. We ought to have them. I'm glad we have them. We need to support them. But we also need to be cultivating the ranks of the protesters and the outside people too in a way that I don't think has really happened over the last 20 years or so. So I think if you look at the situation today, right, we already know the black-white wealth gap is the largest it's ever been. We already talked about the unemployment rate, that it's at least twice that of the white. It's like clockwork. You can look at the white unemployment rate, multiply it by 2, and you generally have your African American unemployment rate. We know that the rate of African Americans going into prison is the highest it's ever been. African Americans are 13% of the population, 12% of the nation's drug users, but more than 50% of those serving time in prison for a drug crime. So we know these things have gotten worse. They've gotten worse. The last time that they got better, the last time that all of those gaps were shrinking rather than growing, was in the 1960s and the 1970s when there was protest happening. Protest, and by protest I don't mean just sit around and talk and let's discuss it and let's say unkind things about one another. I mean genuine out in the streets protest and marching, disrupting the system. And when the protest and the marching stopped in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the progress stopped too. To me, that's not a coincidence. That's not a coincidence. One thing led to the other. and we became too obsessed with elective politics, understandably, because, well, very few African Americans had had the privilege of serving in elective office up until that point. But we became so focused on electoral politics, on getting people in office, that we left the other half of the equation alone. And when that happened, we started to have the problems that I think you see today. And you mentioned that it's the anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, right? Well, next year, we'll celebrate the anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. But I think it's important to remember that even this emphasis on electoral politics that we have now is in jeopardy. It's dangerously in peril because of what the Supreme Court did to rip the Voting Rights Act apart. I don't know why we should even keep up this fiction that the Voting Rights Act still exists because of what the Supreme Court did last year, making it so much easier for state officials throughout the South and other places that had a history of discrimination to do whatever the heck they wanted with their voting laws. And we've seen the impact that's had just in the year since it's happened. So even the electoral politics side of that equation that we focused on is, I think, in jeopardy, is in danger.
Let's talk about 30 seconds about the obsession with elective politics. Are we guilty of electing our leaders who run on these eloquent platforms and not holding their feet to the fire once they get in the door?
Absolutely. I mean, I think most people who run for office have good intentions, want to do the right thing. Doesn't mean I always agree that what they think is the right thing, but at least in their hearts and minds, I think most of the time they're doing what they think is the right thing. But the structure of the system is one where the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Everybody's heard their grandma say that before, and it's a very true thing. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. No politician is going to do anything unless folks make them do it. Not because they don't want to, but because you can be sure that whatever you want, there's somebody on the other side who wants the opposite and who's speaking up loudly and aggressively. And if you only hear from that side rather than the side that wants to do right, it's very easy for politicians to say that it's difficult for them to do anything about it. And they're right. It's not a cop-out. They're not making excuses. Given the structure of the system, it really is very difficult for them to move anything forward unless there's a whole bunch of people out there who are raising Cain to get it done. And so we shouldn't just blame the politicians that things don't happen the way we want. We should blame ourselves for not making them do it. If you make them do it, they will. President Obama has said it himself several times, make me do it. Go out there, be in the streets, make me do it. And that's what we should do.
The bully pulpit, so to say. Dr. Kubic, every second with you is a learning experience. You really are too sharp there, sir.
No, that's very kind.
Two more questions, and we'll give you the final words. Upworthy study showed that Walmart, if they increase their minimum cashier wage of $8.81 an hour to $13.63 an hour, 68 cents box of macaroni would just increase by 1 penny. Dr. Kubic, where do you stand on the increase for the minimum wage to a livable wage argument? We know just by listening to the Walmart statistics that most of the time the scare tactic, if we raise the wage, prices, consumers will pay more out of pocket, is just that, a scare tactic. Are you for increasing livable wage?
Absolutely. So I think it is the morally right thing to do. I think people who work hard, and most people do, a lot of folks like to say, oh, people are lazy. It's not true. It's not true. Go to any job anywhere and you'll see lots of people who are working really hard. There's always one or two who aren't. But I think most people work really hard most of the time. And if you work hard, you ought to be able to provide for yourself and your family. Ought not ever be a time where that is in doubt. And I do think it's a scare tactic. And I think in addition to it being the morally right thing to do, it's also the economically right thing to do, not just for the person involved, but for all of us. Because the best way to get the economy humming again, in my opinion, particularly in this economic crisis, is to do something that we call stimulating aggregate demand. That basically means there's a whole lot more money out there on the streets that folks have in their pockets to spend. The best way to make employers hire again is to have people spending more. The best way to have people spending more is for people to have more money in their pocket to start with. The best way for them to give that, to have that money in their pocket, is for employers to increase wages. And so if people earn more, they spend more. If they spend more, companies hire more people because people are buying more stuff. And that's the way to get the economy going again. I think we've particularly learned that this approach that has been tried the last couple of years, particularly by Republicans in Congress, of austerity, that is, of cutting back, of cutting all the social programs, of cutting unemployment benefits, cutting food stamps, trying not to spend any money, it doesn't work. It hasn't made the situation any better because it's the wrong recipe. The right recipe is to put more money on the street, not less.
I would like to talk just a little bit, we have maybe 30 seconds, about education and stimulating the minds of our children, particularly third, fourth grade, where national statistics suggest is a disconnecting point. In your experience, and we know that post-scholarship achievement, you are still making waves, making noise in the community, still raising your flag consciously to offer a valid opinion and input to the solutions that we need in our community. Who encouraged you when you were a young boy, maybe in a second grade, Miss Filka's class, you raised your hand? Dr. Kubic is smart. He's going to one day achieve scholarly. I know you were encouraged by your reverend, but was there someone who pushed you early on?
Sure. I mean, I think I was very fortunate to have a very large network of support. You know, I had my parents, my grandparents, my family, teachers at school, caring people in the community, you know, neighbors, friends. And I think that's what really makes a difference. You know, everybody says it takes a village to raise a child now, and it's become very cliche to say that, such that people almost laugh it off as not being, you know, anything other than just a cliche. But it's true. That's the way things become cliche in the first place, is that they're true, and then people repeat them so often because they're true that it becomes cliche.
A village of laptops.
That's right. So unless people are out there supporting young people, not just your own children, not just your own family members, but others around you, you can't expect children to know that you support them unless you tell them so. And they need those supportive adults.
Tell us in our final minutes here, final seconds, what projects you'll be involved in this spring, this summer? Traveling? Any publications coming up?
Yeah, so I am the chairman of the worldwide board of directors of People to People International, which is a international organization dedicated to peace and understanding that was founded by President Dwight Eisenhower in 1956. And so as chairman of the board, I do some traveling, I do give some guidance to the staff, and I'm very active in the direction of the organization. So that's a big project for me. I've just finished up a book that I hope will be published early next year on Freedom Incorporated and African American politics in Kansas City. And then, of course, my family is a ever-present project that I love and cherish spending time with, and so I always try and make that a priority.
All right, Dr. Kubic, do you have any final words for What's Up Kansas City?
Just, you know, I keep on keeping on. There's a lot of work to do. It will only get done if we do it together and if we try new things and try some old things that worked before and that we're not doing anymore. But it takes all of us to make it successful, and I know we can do it.
Awesome. Dr. Kubic, we'd like to thank you for coming out, visiting us today. You know, you're right across the street. We might have to give you your own spot.
Well, thanks very much. Thank you for having me.
What's up, Kansas City? I'm your host, Glenn Brian Frizzell. We'd like to invite you to check out more video online at www.whatsupkansascity.net. And remember, the sky is the limit. Aim high, shoot for the moon. If you miss, at the very least, you would have landed among the stars. And you are a star. Take care.
CMG wants you to always remember the victory we because success goes to the best prepared. When you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself. Thanks.